Hello and welcome to a little bit late Foundation set re-review after a couple months of not really having anything to talk about. I am getting ready for Aetherdrift preview season, which means it's time to do my Foundation set re-review. I didn't do a Pioneer Masters set review, so I'm not going to have a re-review for that set, although I played a lot more of it than I did Foundations, actually. I haven't played Foundations in a while, but nonetheless, I'm going to evaluate the cards as they were when I was playing. So, I always like to start with the cards I got wrong. In this case, beginning with Aetherize, or however you want to pronounce that. Um, Really, the big thing with this card is that it's just so much worse. Like it looks on its face kind of like Settle the Wreckage, and like people respect Settle the Wreckage. Um, but the reality is that I shouldn't be respecting Settle the Wreckage. I mean, I respected it as if it were Settle the Wreckage, right? Like I would give Settle the Wreckage a tier 3 rating because I don't like those type of cards. That's kind of what I rated this as. I figured it would be a card that I wasn't going to like, but people in general would like. That was just not the case. It ended up just being bad. And the reason is that bouncing stuff to your opponent's hand and like doesn't actually really progress the game. It just kind of makes it take longer, but they still keep all their resources, which is just not helping you at all. It's too much card disadvantage, and I don't really think this had any place in the format at all. High Fate Trickster. So this one was really hurt by the fact that there were two 1-minute interaction spells in black and red that could interact with this very easily. um, it basically just was game over if your opponent had one of those and you played this card. You kind of just couldn't do anything. You were basically just losing. Now there were ways to because it's 4 mana. There are ways to bait those out, and so you could get around it. But it is still just really bad that happened. Also, just the ability doesn't matter that much. Like casting your spells as if they had flash, yeah, that's fine. It's good even, but it's um, this creature not really being able to block very well is a huge problem. Uh, I wonder if it would even have been better as a 2/3, although then it doesn't attack as well. It just kind of doesn't really do anything super well, and it's just kind of all of its stuff is a bit awkward. Skyship Buccaneer. So this one is only a 1 tier difference in terms of how wrong I felt like I was on this card. And usually I only will put cards in here that are 2 tiers off because there's usually enough of them, and there are enough in this case. But I decided to put this one in my cards that I got wrong because to give a 5 drop a tier 2 rating is kind of implying a lot about it. When the reality is it was just kind of average, and you could put it in your deck and it's fine. You would take it middle of the pack, be pretty happy about it, but you wouldn't be happy if you were pick 2 through 4 taking it. You'd really want to take it picks 4 to 8, something like that, or 4 to 7. I don't remember my tier definitions and all that. But yeah, I mean, it's just going from tier 2 to tier 3 for a 5 drop is actually really significant. So I do feel like this was worth mentioning. That this card just kind of it had a lot of things working against it. The double pip was bad, even for a 5 drop, which I thought was probably not going to be too bad. But the mana in Foundations was kind of worse than usual these days. And also it when it worked, it was good, but not game ending, which I think was kind of what I was expecting on a core set experience. I was kind of expecting a 5 mana 4/3 flyer in a core set to kind of just end the game, when it drew a card. I figured this would kind of just end the game, and the game actually just continued after your opponent played this, and it wasn't as good as I think it would have been in historically in core sets. Revenge of the Rats. So I thought that this card would work. The biggest problem with it is it's just not supported well in this format. There's not a lot of self mill. Even if there was, I think it would still have been tough because this card just making tapped creatures is really bad. You kind of any of these effect that makes tapped creatures, it's hard to quantify how much worse it is because you have to not be dying that next turn, and you're spending 4 mana doing basically nothing for a turn. You're time walking yourself to then eventually then you get things, and then there's maybe enough things to be ahead. But these are 1-1s, and if your opponent's at a kind of high life total, it just sort of stalls the game. It doesn't even like end the game. It still takes a while, and they can still play like flyers and get around you. But it's it just doesn't work, and so my belief in this card was misguided. Soul Shackled Zombie. So the biggest issue with this is that the rate is not as good. So I made the comparison to, I think it's called Diregraph Ghoul from Crimson Vow, which is the 2/3 Death Touch that essentially does the same thing as this. For 4 mana, and I thought that this stat line was comparable. Obviously, not the case. So, for a couple of reasons, one we mentioned earlier is the shocks. So, the 1 mana shocks in the format make this really a problem. The fact that it has 2 toughness instead of 3 toughness is actually really significant. 4 power and Death Touch are not synonymous, but they're like, would you rather have a 4/3 for 4 or a 2/3 Death Touch for 4? I think you'd rather have a 2/3 Death Touch for 4, and so that's kind of what I missed. And there's just enough there's enough knobs that were turned on this card from it being like amazing in that format. Like it was one of the best black commons in Crimson Vow, and this card, just being a lot worse. So sort of something to keep an eye out for in the future. This is probably the most informative of the cards I got wrong. This is the card that I'm like, oh, this is something to keep in mind going forward. The rest of them I don't feel as strongly about. Leyline Axe. So Leyline Axe I thought would be really, really bad because it says Leyline on it, and basically every card that says Leyline on it is really bad and limited. But what really happened with Leyline Axe is it just did enough, right? Like, I actually put this in a deck that was like blue-red spells, and I only played like 8 creatures, and I still put this in the deck because I was like, well, I mean, like I looked on the 17 land stats, and 17 land stats say this is a card that should go in every deck because it's winning enough. And generally what that means to me is like there's a floor, right? So the card had, I think it was like a 58% win rate or something in game in hand. And for me, if a card has that win rate and it's colorless, you should put it in every deck. Because there are people that have put it in the worst deck possible. You know what I mean? Like those people are kind of accounted for. So I put it in the deck that I was like, this is probably not going to work, and it was just like good. Like it was still good even in a deck that I thought it would be terrible in. And I was like, okay, so this card actually is just good then. And it is. The trample is really important. Just everything about this card is really important. Sometimes you just get to like have the card out on the battlefield for free. You just get to have an extra permanent in play for 0 mana that buffs all your creatures and your opponent has to deal with for the whole game. And it's just a strong card. And the fact that it's colorless is really nice to draft as well. And Rogue's Passage. So Rogue's Passage, a colorless land. I don't usually respect colorless lands. I didn't respect this colorless land. It actually was available in both Foundations and Pioneer Masters, and I respect it. I respect Rogue's Passage now. In both formats, the card was pretty good. The cost to include was not as high as... It was worth including, basically. Like, there's a lot of colorless lands that aren't worth including. The first copy of Rogue's Passage, definitely a great card to have in your deck. I think you should pretty much always be playing it. And that's it. It's a rare one for me. I just still see it's only moved up to tier 3 because it still is, that's where I would draft it. I wouldn't be like pack 1, pick 1ing this because it's not essential, but it is a nice tool to have in your decks. Now we're going to move on to some cards I got right, with Vanguard Seraph as the first card I got right. So 4 mana, 4/3 flyer in tier 4. I think some people did get baited. This is one area where I didn't get baited by the core set nature. I was like, no, 4 mana, 3/3 flyer is still bad. And this just didn't do anything. Like, this card just really didn't do a whole lot. Like, it doesn't do anything when it ETBs. It was playable in like a blue-white flyers deck or the Angel, if you have the 3-drop Angels. But I don't think it was like good, and that's where it is reflected here. Yeah. Refute, very happy to be right about Refute, putting it in tier 2, saying it was one of Blue's best commons. That was true. It was proven to be true. No board impact, still a cancel, but it just does enough. It just does enough to be worth the spot, and it's I kind of hope they. I mean, they're probably not going to reprint this because it's in Foundations, but it's a card that like I would love to see in limited fairly frequently. Like this could be your blue counterspell variant. I would. This is a card I would reprint. I don't know, once a year, something like that. I think it's really a great design for blue, and I think it's kind of shocking to me we didn't have it before, and I think we should just kind of be doing this. I don't know. I would personally be putting this in like as many sets as I could get my hands on, but I don't think it's gonna happen. Phyrexian Arena. So Phyrexian Arena was very very bad last time we saw it, which it was in MH3 or was it? No, I think it was not in MH3. It was in Phyrexia All Will Be One. I know that, and it was really bad there. And in this format, I said no. I'm sticking to my guns here. I'm gonna rate it in tier 3. That's about as good as it ended up being. It's a card that people would pack one, pick one. I would pack one, pick one, even though it's not as good, not worthy of that probably, just because it's fun to build around. It's a fun card, so I think that it being in tier 3, I feel good about the fact that I put it there, and that things worked out in that way. Seeker's Folly. So the Mind Rod in black at uncommon this set. Just there was like a decent amount of like 1 toughness creatures, especially against like blues flyers, and there were some elves as well, so you get those. And yeah, so that just made this card kind of decent. And Mind Rod, like when Mind Rod's good, it's good, right? Like when Mind Rod does something, it tends to be a pretty strong card, and when it doesn't do something, this one usually has something that it can do as well. Battle Song Berserker. So we put this in tier 2 after being disappointed by Most Valuable Slayer in the previous format, and that card sort of underperforming people's expectations, being a tier 3 card. It would have been very easy to go back and say, no, we're putting this in tier 3 as well. Nope, we stuck to it and put it in tier 2. We still believe that this is a more powerful card. It's a bigger minion. The Menace, I think, is probably better on average than First Strike. You would think that it's worse, but I do think that Menace, in a lot of cases, is better because it actually gets your opponent to like interact. Like when your opponent gets blown out by Menace, they get more blown out than when they get blown out by First Strike, right? Because with First Strike, they block something, you pump it, they lose 1 creature. Menace, they have to double block something, and then you pump your thing, and they lose 2 creatures. So it actually leads to more, like, the top end is higher with Menace. Obviously, it bricks more often, too, a little bit. Not as much, though. I think it's about the same brick rate. So that was really nice. I think Menace is actually kind of a better ability than First Strike in a lot of spots. And my overall set rating, so that was it. Kind of a quick little review here. I would give it a 6 out of 10. We're gonna need to change my rating system because I think I liked this more than Duskmourn, despite rating Duskmourn higher. So I need to change my rating scale. But I'm sticking with the 6 out of 10 for this. Duskmourn, part of that too was it was about the set design, which I couldn't argue with. Like that card set is objectively well designed. Even though I didn't like it as much as a lot of people did. This set I liked probably more than a lot of people did, but I have given it a lower rating because it just is a core set. I really liked getting to do the Tolarian Terror stuff again. That was really fun for me. I did that, I don't know, 6 times or something like that. Really enjoyed it. It's just a really fun deck to get to draft once you know how to draft it. There was a time, it just reminded me of the time in DMU when, for like the 2nd or 3rd week, there was just this, it was just open every single draft and you could just jam it every time, and I basically got to relive that experience. In this format, the card was not as good for most people, but I found it to be very strong still. And I got to, another big thing with this format is I started playing Magic in like 2011. The first cards I really play with. Vampire Nighthawk is among those cards. Lightning Bolt, no Lightning Bolt in this set, obviously, but Nighthawk was here. Lionware Elves was here. Those are staples of sort of my intro to Magic the Gathering, so it was really cool to get to play with those cards again, and I really liked that experience. One of my things I didn't like about the format is green. I personally don't like monocolor deck stuff in formats. I I think that incentivizing people to draft monocolor decks is kind of not. It's not great. Like I don't because it requires more luck in the draft. Like it sort of is dependent on what you open more. And you say that's true for every deck, and that to a certain extent that is true. But I feel that monocolor decks, you just get into this spot where it's like, well, I hope that the cards that make me have a reasonable curve get opened right at the right distributions, and then also like I hope that my pod doesn't open like a rare of that color in pack 2 or pack 3 and then to move in. Like that also can happen to you. And it's just kind of I don't like that. And that was like sort of the best way to draft green. And so I don't like when that's the case because green was sort of bad with everything else. Like it was fine, like you could play it, but it was just sort of worse than the other colors. I mean, red wasn't great either, but green was, I think, clearly the worst. And so it sort of incentivizes sort of doing its own thing, and that can get kind of frustrating. Um, and that's it. That's my Foundation set re-review. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the set reviews for Aether Drift next week. See you.